Sound design.
So, what are Bob McCarthy's summation zones and how can they help us in our work? So, sound system engineering is about managing interactions. And so, when we want to make decisions quickly, we don't want to zoom in too much and just look at this frequency and this frequency and this frequency and this frequency. We want to be able to break them down into kind of bigger chunks so we can move quickly. And that's what Bob McCarthy's summation zones help us do. They help us categorize some of these interactions and sort of make decisions quickly. So in Bob McCarthy's book, he has this chart, which looks like this. Sorry, it's kind of grainy. This is the best one I could get. And there's a lot of information on this chart. And I can tell you that the first few times I looked at it, it was like really confusing. So I want to go through a few of the things in this chart and see if I can help them help you. So I want to break it down into two sections. First, the level-based summation zones here on the bottom, and then the phase-based summation zones here on the top. I want to show you how I think about these and how they work. And then I want to show you how I'm teaching a robot to try to understand it as well. Okay, so let's start with a simple demo. So here I have Crosslight. There's nothing happening. We're just looking at a flat line. We're measuring a microphone cable. Well, let's measure another microphone cable and then add those two together. So we'll add a channel and we will look at both signals together. And so blue is on top of red, so we can't really see anything. So let's turn one of them down a couple of dB. Now we can see both of them. So we've got our channel 1 and our channel 2, red and blue. And if I remove that attenuation, now they're on top of each other. And if we sum them together in black, we see we get 6 dB of summation. 0 plus 0 equals 6. That's what we expected. Great. What happens if I put a delay into one of the channels? So really common example, right? We're going to see our friend, the comb filter. And so we've got, with a 1 millisecond delay, we have our first null at 500 hertz and our first peak at 1K. So let's put our cursors there. And I will set them to channel 1 and channel 2. And then I'll set one at 500 hertz and then the other one at 1K. And now we can see the delta in between them. So I can see here, let's see. And the reading shows us nothing here because there's like an infinity null here, right? It's going all the way down. So let's look at how Bob McCarthy's summation zones can help us sort of describe some of this interaction. So let's start with the combing zone. So the combing zone says that if you have a level offset of 0 to 4 dB, then you have the potential, then ripple will be greater than 12 dB. So it says 0 to 4 dB. So let's turn down channel 2, 1, 2, 3, 4 dB. So ripple is this shape from top to bottom. And so if I look at the delta now, it says 12.9 dB. And so we're looking at this kind of 12 dB ripple here. And if I were to make this level offset smaller, we're going to see the ripple get worse and worse until we were back to where we were earlier. Okay, so that's the combing zone. That's the combing zone in terms of level offset, anywhere between 0 and 4 dB. Let's look at the next one, transition zone, 4 to 10 dB, and the ripple should be between 6 and 12 dB. So now I can turn this offset up even more, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so now the ripple should have changed from 12 to 6 dB. And I can see over here that the delta says 5.7 dB between this valley here and this peak here. So let's keep going. So isolation zone is any level offset greater than 10 dB, and the ripple should be less than 6 dB. So if I go up to an 11 decibel offset, now our ripple should be less than 10 dB Is that what I said? Sorry, less than 6 dB. So now we see that it's 5 dB, and if I keep going, the ripple should get less and less and less, and it's not going to completely disappear until we get way down. Remember that we're pretty zoomed in here, so, really this has no effect on us anymore, but I just want to show you that I keep going down, and you can keep seeing it a little bit. So now I'm down at something like minus 50 dB, and now it doesn't really matter what the delay is. The sum isn't going to be affected because the level offset is so great, they don't really have an effect on each other anymore. So I can change this delay to 2 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds. It doesn't matter, I can change it all day long, and the sum isn't affected. And that's why we say that when it comes to magnitude and phase, that magnitude is the tiebreaker. Because if you turn something all the way down, there's no sum anymore, right? Okay. So that was just a quick overview of the level-based summation zones. Now let's look at the phase-based summation zones. So I'll take off my delay here. I'll take off my gain change. So now we're back to where we were. So let's switch to looking at phase. So I'm here on the phase graph. Everything's 0 because I haven't introduced any change yet. So let me put in a delay of 0.1 milliseconds in channel B. And let me turn off the sum. So we're just looking at channel A in red and channel B in blue. And we see that they start to diverge because of the delay that I put in. So we see it sloping down here. So what the phase-based summation zones say is that as long as the phase is within 120 degrees, 0 to 120 degrees, I should have summation. Summation from 0 to 6 dB. And the cancellation zone says that if the phase offset is 120 to 180, I'm going to have some amount of cancellation. Now, another way to look at this that I think is helpful is the phase wheel. This is from Merlin Van Veen's site. And so if we step back and just look at the macro shape of the phase wheel, we see that 2/3 of it are coupling, aka, here we go, sorry, not aka, the coupling zone, and 1/3 is cancellation. So 2/3 coupling, 1/3 cancellation, aka uncoupled. So good news, right? So odds are that we're gonna land in the coupling zone no matter what we do. So let's go back over and look at our demo again. So what this tells me is that if I'm looking at the phase graph here, and by the way, since this box here, this graph is doing double duty, I just switched from magnitude to phase. Now the phase is on the right here. So if you haven't seen this kind of graph before, that's how it works. When I'm in the magnitude display, this is the y-axis, and when I'm in the phase display, this is the y-axis, and that allows me to then look at magnitude and phase at the same time. Okay, so let's review. So the phase offset is getting wider and wider and wider, and so I want to find 120 degrees, and that's about here. I'm looking at this number over here on this y-axis. So I know that when I get to 120 degrees, which is at about 3K, then I should start to see the transition in the magnitude from summation to cancellation, from addition to subtraction. So when I turn the sum back on the magnitude, I can expect to see 6 dB of summation, and then it'll start to slope down, and then it'll hit 0, and then it'll cross into cancellation. Okay, so let's switch to looking at magnitude and phase. Let's turn the sum back on, and now we see that pattern that I was just talking about. So we have 6 dB of summation, and then here at about 3K, we hit 0, where we have 120 degree phase offset, and now we start to go into cancellation, and then comb filter as we go, where is it? As we go around and around the phase wheel, and the cycle continues. So what does this mean for real speaker measurements? So as some of you know, I've been trying to train a robot to do crossover alignment. And this way I can generate, thousands and thousands of variations. And that's what the project Subaligner is all about, so that I can basically pick any two speakers and come up with a phase-aligned crossover result using delay, polarity, or maybe even filters. So while I've been training this robot how to do this, I've been trying to look at its results to make sure that it's doing good work and to make sure that I understand what it's doing and that, everything's kind of working. And I thought I'd share some of that with you to not only just talk about how I look at these graphs, but also I think this may turn into a fun kind of puzzle for some of you. I've been thinking about how, you have those giant books of Sudoku puzzles. I used to have a neighbor who would get up every morning and work on them. So if I ever came by at like 7 in the morning, she'd always be working on her Sudoku puzzles. Okay, so some people really like those. And what I could do is just print out a bunch of these, potentially like 10,000, but that's kind of crazy. I could print out a bunch of these and just put them into a collection, and then you could go through them and sort of practice looking at these graphs, but also see if you can solve the puzzle. So let me show you what I mean. Okay, so here we have a main subalignment. This is a magnitude graph. This is a phase graph. Don't look down here yet. Just look at these top two graphs for now. So there's a lot going on here, but what I've tried to do is incorporate some of the things that we've been talking about related to the summation zones. So remember that we have these red, yellow, green summation zones. And that's not the one I want. Here we go. So red, yellow, green summation zones. Combing, transition, isolation. And I've just drawn that along the bottom here. I got this idea from Sat Live. So Sat Live has been doing this for a long time. It allows you to identify magnitude relationships and then basically put overlays on the graphs. Sorry, I don't have that open right now. I should have shown you that. But this is kind of similar. So I want to see these exact kind of summation zones related to level offset and phase offset. So what does this mean? So red means that we have the biggest risk and reward, right? So we talk about how we have the potential for 6 dB of summation or lots of cancellation, right? And in the isolation zone, we have medium risk and medium reward. So we could get a little bit of summation and a little bit of cancellation. Then over here in the isolation zone, we're kind of less interested. So this is how these summation zones help us make decisions faster, because we can look and say, okay, where levels are very close to each other, this is where we really need to be careful with the phase interactions, and they need to be as close as possible. We've talked about this corridor of 60 degrees, right? They need to be within 60 degrees at least for us to be getting summation in that area of 5.5 dB or more. And then, once we get onto this green area, it's a little bit less important. So this is really where we need to focus our alignments when we're looking at this stuff. So I've drawn on top of here to show you this, and we can see that it moves pretty quickly from combing to transition is just this tiny area, right? And then the isolation zone is really long, because that's anywhere from anywhere greater than 10 dB, and then it goes all the way out to, I think, 20 or 30, something like that. And then I just turned it off here, once we get too far out. And I've done the same thing down here in the phase graph. So we have red and blue, main and sub. Again here, red and blue, main and sub. And I've tried to use the same colors Bob McCarthy used on this graph here, coupling zone, cancellation zone. And you can see gray here, cancellation zone, and this kind of blue, navy blue for coupling zone. So as long as these two guys are within 120 degrees, either, this way on the graph or wrapping all the way around. That's not very easy to draw, is it? Wrapping all the way around. It doesn't matter. Either way, it's going to show us. Just looking at these really fast, we can see why this is working. We can see really quickly, everything here is in the coupling zone. It's within 120 degrees. That's why this magenta trace is showing us summation. This is the current sum based on this phase relationship. The last things I haven't talked about yet are this dotted black trace. That would be a perfect sum. So that I'm calling this the target. This is where we want to end up. And as you can see, we're not quite there yet. And that's why we have a score of 79 instead of 100. So this is the puzzle part. I want to see if this would be fun to go through some of these, and I can do more videos about these if you want. But I can also just put a bunch of these images into a collection, and you could download them and go through them in your own time. And maybe, you can send me your solutions if you want, but the solutions are also, some solutions are also farther down here on the page. But let's try to solve this manually before we look at the answer that the robot came up with. So I have drawn a line here in the center of the crossover region, and I have given you the values of main and sub and phase, and then from that, you could come up with a few different solutions just manually. So if you've taken my intro to the phase graph, or you've done, you've read Bob McCarthy's book, or you've done any other training, then you're hopefully familiar with group delay formula or the phase formula. And so with the group delay formula, we can quickly just plug in some of these numbers and come up with some delay values that might give us alignment. So the first thing we need is the difference between these two numbers. So I can see 30 to 30, positive 30 to minus 30 is about 60 degrees, but this is 36. So let me just make this easy on myself. 36 plus 31 is 67. So phase offset of 67 degrees. So group delay formula, 67 degrees divided by 360, divided by the frequency that I'm measuring it at, which is 88 hertz. So 88. And now I have seconds, but I want milliseconds, so I multiply by 1,000, and I get 2.11 milliseconds. So I know that if I add delay to this red trace, that is going to make it bend down, and at least at this frequency, it should be aligned with 2.11 milliseconds of delay. That's just one possible solution, right? So we could talk about going through some more solutions, so maybe we could make it wrap around the other way. But let's see what solution the robot came up with. So the robot says, by the way, hey, I found a better solution. This is a higher score than what the current status is. And what it did was it subtracted 2.3 milliseconds of delay from the sub. The reason for that is just that programmatically, it's a lot easier for me to train the robot to just always take action on one channel instead of having to figure out like which channel. I don't know. It's kind of lazy on my part, but that's what's happening in this graph. Instead of adding delay to the main, it's subtracting delay from the sub. I know there's no such thing as negative delay, but it was just easier to do here. Okay, and now we see the sum trace, the pink, is now almost on top of the target for the entire crossover region here. So we pretty much came up with the same solution, right? We were thinking, okay, 2.11 milliseconds. The robot came up with 2.3, really close. The thing to keep in mind is that the robot is not just taking one frequency into account. It's looking at the entire crossover region, and it's using some weights based on Bob McCarthy's summation zones to then come up with a solution that it thinks is like the best compromise. So what's this other thing over here? Let me zoom out real quick and just give you an overview of this graph. So I want you to know that these all go together. Okay, magnitude and phase, and then these go together. This is a delay-based solution, delay and polarity, and then these two go together, magnitude and phase, and this is a, what if I added a filter solution? So what if we didn't want to use delay? What if we wanted to come up with another solution? What kind of filter could we insert here that would give us the phase shift that we're looking for? So we're looking for, what is it, like 66 degrees of phase shift. And so I don't know of a filter that creates 66 degrees of phase shift, but I do know that first, second order filters create 45 and 90 degrees of phase shift. So I wouldn't put a filter on 88 hertz, but maybe if I wanted, less than 90 degrees of phase shift, I could put a filter up a little bit higher. So we might talk about a second order filter, or we might talk about a first order all pass filter to create something that's a little bit less than 90 degrees of phase shift in this area. So I'm not an expert with filters, but if I were just to hazard a guess right now, I would say, hey, up somewhere here around 100 hertz, maybe a second degree filter or a first degree all pass filter up here. And that is similar, I think, to the solution that the robot came up with. So Subaligner says, hey, if you put a first order all pass filter on the main, and you know it's the main because it's red, that's how I've done this legend. Red is for main, blue is for sub, and you put it at 105 hertz, so that's what I was guessing, right? Like about 100 hertz. And then these don't matter anymore, so just order and frequency, then you can get the phase shift that you're looking for. So here in this kind of cyan color, you can actually see the filter. This is a first order all pass filter at 105 hertz. And we can see that at 100 hertz, it's created 90 degrees of phase shift. Let me just point that out. So at around 100 hertz, 90 degrees of phase shift, and we were looking at 88, right? And where is that? So 88 is around here. Sorry, this arrow's off now. But what you can see is that it caused the main trace, which was up here like this, it caused it to bend down just enough so that these two guys could be right on top of each other with basically 0 milliseconds of delay. Yeah, so that's what these graphs are all about. For me, it's just interesting to look at the solutions that the robot comes up with, and also to just help me like practice looking at these graphs. So let's look at one more together. That was a UPQ D1 and a 500 HP. Now let's look at a UPQ D1 and a 650p. So as you can see, this one just in its native state is not doing too well. And if we look down here at the phase graph, we can see that they're a little bit farther apart. So let's see if we can go through our process again. So let's do what we did last time. Let's use the group delay formula first and just see what would happen if we lined up these two frequencies. So we need to find the total phase offset first. So 87 plus 30, that's 117 degrees. 117 divided by 360 divided by the frequency that we're looking at, 89 hertz, and that's seconds, so we need to multiply by 1,000. So we get 3.65 milliseconds, which would cause this guy to sort of bend down, and then these two would be phase aligned, at least at this one frequency. So I can't even remember what I said, 3.65 milliseconds. So what did the robot come up with? It says, oh, I'm going to do 1.68 milliseconds. That's interesting because 3.65 divided by 2 is 1.82. So instead of doing this thing, it did half of that and then a polarity inversion. So it has decided that it actually gets a better match here by doing a polarity inversion and delay than just delay. And so we could have looked at that as well. We could have, added 180 degrees to one of these and then done the group delay formula as well and come up with a second solution and hopefully come up with the same number. Okay, so what did I say that the phase offset was here? 117 degrees. Okay, so we can see we have 117 degree phase offset. We need 117 degrees of phase shift at 89 hertz. 117 again is pretty close to 90. So similar to the last one, we might look at a second order high pass filter on the main or an all pass filter in this region to get the 117 degrees of phase shift that we need. So let's look at what the robot came up with. And it says a second order all pass filter at 62 hertz. So that's interesting because it's going to create 180 degrees of phase shift at 62 hertz. And then it says that it also needs a polarity inversion. Now, I think that polarity inversion is actually a typo, and I'm going to have to fix that, because we can see that, yes, it adds this 180 degrees of phase shift, and so we can see that it flips around, and now the phase of the sub is right on top of the main, and now we need, almost 0 milliseconds of delay. But I think the polarity we really don't need, because we can head over to map.xt and actually verify this. You could also do this in map3D, but I don't think you can get the 500 HP model in map3D yet. So here I have those speakers that we were just using, the UPQ D1 and the 650p. I'm sorry, I mentioned 500 HP earlier. Also, I think in map3D there is no 650p yet because they are not supporting the legacy models. Okay, so I put these equidistant from my microphone, and then over here I put in the processing. So I've got this all-pass filter, 62 hertz, 0.67 Q, just like we had over here, just like the robot told us to do. And then I can see on my audio analyzer that I get the result that we saw on the graph over here. So that seems to be working, and that's also why I know that that polarity inversion is actually a typo. So I just need to fix that. But otherwise, it's cool to see that this is actually working. Okay, so this ended up being kind of a long video, but I hope this was helpful for you in seeing how Bob McCarthy's summation zones can help us quickly classify things and like start to look for trends, start to break things apart into like these bigger chunks, so we're not just worried about like, oh, there's like a million things happening here. So I would love to know from you any ways that you've been using the summation zones in your own work. Let me know how they've helped you. And I'd also like to know, if you would like a copy of some of these charts that I'm coming up with, then just let me know. Comment on this video or send me an email, nathan@sounddesignlive.com, and I'll put together a package for me. I'll put together a package for you. And also let me know if you have any suggestions for how I could improve these graphs to not only help me analyze the outputs from Subaligner, but also, just make them easier to read. All right. Thank you. Sound design.